And time to take a look at what's making headlines around the world. And for that, I'm joined here in the studio by Diptyque Laurent. Hello, Dipty.
Hi, Annette.
Now, there's been much hilarity after US President Donald Trump invented a terror attack in Sweden this weekend.
That's right. Well, Donald Trump now has clarified that he was actually speaking about, quote, general rising crime. This when he appeared to describe a terror attack in Sweden on the weekend. Turns out it was not true, or it was misguided at least, and set off a Twitter frenzy of memes and jokes, as you can imagine. It also prompted the Swedish embassy to ask what on earth was going on. And one former Swedish leader even wondered what Donald Trump is smoking. Now, what's interesting, though, is that the Huffington Post reports that this is not the first time that the good-natured Swedes have sort of been ruffled up by Trump. In fact, their dislike for him goes well before this weekend's event. Trump's policies go against the very fabric of Swedish society on things like immigration, for instance. Now, this article from the Post looks at attitudes towards presidential candidates. And as you can see in this graph behind me, just 6% of Swedes have confidence in Trump. This was back in 2016. This compared to well over 20% for countries like Italy, China, and Hungary.
Now, while President Trump has been confusing the Swedes, his Vice President, Mike Pence, has been in Munich for the security conference.
That's right. It was really the first meeting between Pence and the European leaders, and The Independent has penned an interesting piece about this security meeting in Munich and how it's become less about the political divide between right and left and more about the divide between the liberal cosmopolitan society and the populist, xenophobic, authoritarian one, really, that we're seeing emerge in different parts of the world. This is really highlighted for The Independent between the divide of Marine Le Pen, the far-right leader here in France, and Emmanuel Macron, the independent candidate. The duo are leading the polls right now, and Macron has managed to take advantage of a political vacuum in France created by scandals, and he's proving a foil to the far-right populists. But time will only tell if the Macron bubble, as they call it in The Independent, is here to stay.
Now, another big story making headlines, FT, is the offensive to take back the western part of Mosul in Iraq, which of course could mark a turning point in that campaign against the Islamic State group.
Well, The Guardian reports that this is really almost like a war of attrition. Over 500,000 people are trapped in the west of the city, and The Guardian describes quite devastating humanitarian conditions and a lack of food supplies, drinking water, electricity. 4 of the 5 bridges on the Euphrates River, which divides the east and west of the city, have been blown up, essentially trapping people in the west of Mosul. Now, the Daily Beast has penned a really interesting piece about the fact that the Islamic State group have actually been preparing for the Battle of Mosul for many months now. And in the past 2.5 years, they've been recruiting members for so-called sleeper cells in the east of the city, while the war for the West is being conducted by rather professional counterterrorism forces. In the East, it's really a hodgepodge mix of different groups, and in this chaos, the Islamic State group has been able to flourish.
Now, a change of pace here, moving across the Atlantic to Brazil, where the Carnival is kicking off this Friday, but it's really taking place during a very turbulent time, isn't it?
That's right. Will Brazilians cancel Carnival? That's what the country is wondering. That's what the New York Times is wondering, rather. The country is going through enormous political and economic turbulence, and at least 48 towns or cities have canceled festivities this year. In one case, Porto Ferreira in the state of Sao Paulo has called off Carnival, and they're diverting the funds towards buying a new ambulance. The Times says that amid corruption, nationwide protests, state salaries not being paid, Olympic euphoria well and over in Brazil, it's quite a different atmosphere this year for Carnival.
And finally, so something which is very close to my heart, because this used to be my favourite game as a kid, and I'm talking about Monopoly. But there's something rather controversial that's happening with the board game. What's that all about?
Well, Annette, if you're a loyalist, like many of us out there who love Monopoly and love Monopoly in the traditional version, well, this might not please you so much. The beloved board game has held an internet poll to decide which tokens get the axe. And it seems that the Monopoly users have called it a day on the humble thimble.
No.
It was one of the original 10 tokens in the Monopoly board when it was first released in 1935, but now supporters are eschewing it in favor of more modern tokens like the Mr. Monopoly emoji. Anyway, Hasbro, it's part of Hasbro, the Monopoly makers' attempts to modernize the game. For instance, last year they released a cashless version of the game where you could pay with credit cards. Anyway, the new tokens will be announced on March the 19th. That's World Monopoly Day.
Oh, well, why change something like that? I don't get it. Anyway, thank you so much for that, Dipti. And if you want to take a look at the stories that she's been talking about, you, of course, can head to our website, that being France24.com.